Hi, this is David, or Davjez, or David, or David Sagastizato, whatever you want to call me. And this is the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I have two wonderful guests with me today. First would be Mike Yost, the husband to my sister, father to the infamous Arthur, certified flight instructor, candidate for a master in aviation management, lover of all things aviation, fan of Oklahoma Sooners football, proud member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and an avid nerd. Did I leave anything out, Mike?
Nope, you got me. Howdy.
Cool. Awesome. And then we have my good friend F. She does machine embroidery digitizer,
Digitizing, yeah.
digitizing, both at work and at home. F spends her non-embroidery related free time playing video games, tabletop games, reading, consuming educational internet content, and generally being a nerd.
There we go.
So, today our subject is going to be communication. We're going to be talking about communication and how we communicate, pretty much.
Cool.
So we didn't get much prep beforehand. So I'm assuming this is primarily communications within relationships, right?
Uh, yeah, pretty much like any kind of relationship, I would
Oh yeah, not
say.
romantic specifically.
Yeah, so pretty much, um, how would you say, or like, I mean, we could even like think of like what the definition of communication really is, like what it means to communicate as like a
Webster
base.
Dictionary defines communication
No,
as
I want what you guys define as communication. For you, what is, I would say, good communication and what is bad communication for in your two eyes? And we can start with F.
I like that we both have one eye because we have two eyes between us. Um, Personally, I think communication is anything that allows two people to have the same or a similar thought. So there can be verbal communication, obviously, is the most common kind, but also nonverbal communication. Sometimes you just need the right motion, and suddenly you both have the same understanding, or you and whoever you're communicating with.
Yeah. What in your eyes do you think would be like a bad form of communication?
I don't want to hog the time, so if you have anything to say, Mike, go ahead.
Um, Bad communication is, I guess you could go back to saying it's the old thinking one another can read each other's minds. That never really works out because more often than not, I'd say 99% of the time, except for that, one superhero or whoever it might be, that may or may not exist, cannot read minds. So, a lot of people do a lot of assuming in relationships. And I think that's where bad communication comes from, is the assuming that one person knows what you're thinking, what your goals are, or maybe you have the same goal, but you're not communicating on how to achieve that goal. So, yeah, assuming to me is one of the worst things to have successful communication.
I totally agree. I think the assumption is the key part because there's assuming you can read the other partner's mind, like assuming in the place of communication. But also, even when you are communicating, if you even just the definition of a word can like start an argument because one person has one definition of a word and another person has another definition, and so you're both working off different definitions, but you're assuming that the other person is using the same definition as yours, so disagreements can happen out of completely nowhere. I definitely agree with the assuming part.
Yeah, and with that too, I mean, you can. whoever you're communicating with, whether it's a partner or a friend or a colleague or whoever it is, you could be, you know, think of like the alphabet A through Z. You might make it, you both know you want to get to Z, maybe, and you might both go and communicate about steps A, B, C, D, E, F, all the way to like K. But then after that point, one person goes one way and the other person's thinking the other way, but you didn't discuss it in depth enough. And so then again, another miscommunication happens, and to where you get to that point and everything seems like it was great, but there was again another assumption that, oh well, this is the way that we're going to do it, all the way through from start to finish, whereas the other person thought otherwise. And so again, just going back to assuming, and it's hard to communicate sometimes the way that you desire to. It takes a long time to learn to communicate, with any relationship, and it takes active effort and work to do that.
I agree. I think that communication is one of those things that does take a lot of time and work. Um, but I would emphasize how important it is to learn how to communicate effectively, to communicate in a way where you not only are understood, but understand other people. Because I believe the points that you two were trying to make really resonated with that idea of understanding each other. You're not just thinking about and assuming what the other person might do. You truly want to understand them. You truly want to know what it is that they're saying and feeling and going through. So, does anyone have any other points on that they had and wanted to bring up?
I don't think so.
No.
Sorry, I don't know if that was like an awkward way to ask that.
We can edit out all the awkward bits.
Oh yeah. So how do you handle communication? This is for either of you. And I guess to kind of elaborate a little bit more, what is it? What are some methods I would say that you two implement in your relationships with others, whether it be friends, family, your significant other? How do you handle communication? Like, what is it that you do?
I
Um,
think there's two things that I learned from self-help books that I find really valuable. There's just the way I normally learned to communicate growing up, but these are things that I've actively tried to implement very consciously. And those two things are curiosity, as in being genuinely curious about the other person's viewpoint, because like all too often people will be having a conversation, and before the other person even finishes what they're saying, you already have a response in your head. You've already, going back to assuming, you've already assumed what they feel or decided that you want to have a rebuttal, and you're not really curious to fully understand their point or their meaning. So I think like a big way to counteract that is to literally just be as curious as possible, to treat it like you're exploring and trying to understand versus trying to just get your thought out or assuming that you know everything about what the other person is saying. And the other thing I've tried to implement is vulnerability. Brene Brown has written on it extensively over multiple books. But the general idea is that if you're going to be a good communicator and build strong relationships, you need to be vulnerable. You need to be able to. I wish I had pulled up the Brene Brown's specific definition, but you need to be able to put yourself at the mercy of the other person. You need to be able to share embarrassing moments and secrets. You need to be able to say things that you aren't fully sure of. You need to essentially put yourself in a vulnerable position, kind of like how in a functioning relationship, in a survival sense, you need to be able to trust a person enough to turn your back on them, or to show your neck to them or whatever, in if we're going to take it in a very literal physical sense. But in a metaphorical sense, you can be vulnerable with other people, and that fosters relationships so well. And it's been really important to me.
Man, I feel as if you give me a lot of hope with that because over the past 2 years, pretty much since my relationship with my fiance started, I have been working a lot on both of those things. And I think being with her and just like thinking about my life in general, where I was at, helped me realize a lot of different things. And I started working on changing in a lot of different ways. But one of those ways was with my relationships and truly trying to be vulnerable. And the first part that you mentioned where you just try not to think of a response in your head, I immediately thought of that after I asked the question and posed it to you too. Immediately my brain was like, "Oh, yep, that's something that we do. We try really hard not to do that because I don't know if it's my ADHD or if it's just all of the medication that I'm on. It's definitely not the medication, actually. I take that back. But I've always been like that. So I've always just, I start to come up with a response so that I can just respond right away. And over the past few years, I've spent so much more time thinking about listening, pretty much. It's very frequent still for me where I have to turn my attention back to the person and back to what they're saying, but I'm working on it, you know. It's something that I've been putting a lot of effort into. So I totally agree with that. That is one of those things that really helps you understand people. It really helps you see who they are and what they have to offer for you and to the world. Because if you're just going back to the whole assuming thing, if you're assuming what they're going to say and you end up interrupting them in the middle of something they're saying because you're angry or upset or sad or whatever, or you just assume that they are meaning you harm or something, then it just turns into it can turn into a pretty terrible situation. I think there's been a lot of times with Haley that I've just assumed she's attacking me or she's on the offense towards me because I grew up in a household where I mean I grew up in a great household, but in my household it was very much on the defense. I was one of the younger kids. My parents were very strict, so I was constantly being made fun of. I was constantly being questioned if I was talking back to my parents, and um, it's created this like I'm trying to think of a different word than condition, but it essentially created a condition where I now, even now to this day, am an extremely defensive person. I feel as if I have to defend everything I do and say and explain everything I do and say, or people won't understand me for exactly what am, and then they'll get angry at me. Um, but I definitely want anyone who ever listens to this or any of my podcasts to know that change and growth are possible, and everyone has the opportunity to grow and to become better at things. And I think that's something that I want to promote in everything that I put out into the world, whether it be through podcasts or streaming or just talking to my friends or anything. I want people to know that I radiate positivity. Um, but anyway, Mike, do you have anything you want to input?
Yeah, repeat the question one more time so I had thoughts and
So, how do you handle communication? Essentially, what are some tips and tricks you remind yourself to communicate better? What are the how are the ways you communicate or have learned how to communicate? I mean, everyone's had to learn how to do it, so
okay, so I guess four things. Number one, my high school coach, Coach Swaggy P, Jerry Parker, Coach P, he had a rule where if you had a disagreement with him about something, rather than blowing up about it, he had a rule where unless it was like absolutely urgent, you needed to set up a time to talk with him at least one day after said disagreement, whether it was in practice or if it was some other time. And the reason why is that way you have time to calm down. If he if he didn't know what he did, right, then it wouldn't really matter to him. But if he was also, frustrated at you for doing XYZ, then he could calm down. But no, the main thing was he would ask you to not come to him until like the next day. And I remember one time I was a lineman. I was starting as a left guard, and I didn't get benched because I started both sides of the ball, offense and defense. But I got taken off the offensive side, and it really frustrated me. And I went home, and I was super frustrated about it. On Saturday, I texted Coach P if I could meet him on Monday. And Monday, we sat down and we talked about it, and we had a heart to heart. And really, he just told me what he needed from me and why he took me off the offensive line and wanted me to just focus a lot heavier on defense, etc. And it made sense. It was for the better of the team. And I mean, we ended up taking state again that year in football. But so one thing is taking time as necessary to cool down before you talk. The second one is when Elizabeth and I, my wife, David's sister.
My sister.
Anyway, when we got married, we've been blessed to have a good relationship, but like we've also worked on it a ton. And being newlyweds, I mean, any relationship, whether you've been, because we dated for a year before we got married, and I mean, no matter how long you've been in a relationship, I guess more romantic speaking in this sense, but it took us a long time to figure out how to speak what's on our minds. I remember when we'd have arguments, like I just couldn't figure out how to talk out what was on my mind. And so I'd be like quiet for like hours on end before I could finally articulate what I needed to say. And what's funny is now, like 5-6 years later, it's almost like opposite, but on her end, it's more or less she just needs time to like calm down, but I'm like ready to talk it out now. So it's kind of funny. I mean, she hasn't really changed. She's always been, she's ready to talk about it in a couple minutes, 20, 30 minutes. She just has time to have time to herself. So again, similar to what Coach Parker had us do, just give yourself a little bit of space and a little bit of time. But the point I'm trying to make here, number two, Gordon B. Hinckley, one of the previous presidents of the LDS the church, there's some talk that he had given years ago. I don't really remember when it was given, but there's one sage key advice that he gave from his relationship with his wife, and they had been married for like 60 plus years, some odd. But he shared that he and his wife had never yelled at each other during an argument. They always spoke quietly, and they made an effort to speak quietly, even when emotions were rising and tempers were rising, because it allowed them to have more civil discourses rather than just being angry and letting that anger like soar and rise. And so that's one thing that Elizabeth and I have emphasized doing. We've almost yelled at each other. We certainly raised our voices at each other, but not quite at a yell tone. And it's helped a lot because there's so many times where it's like we're so frustrated with one another, but we, I guess, have conditioned or trained ourselves, you could say, to do our best to talk quietly through things. And it helps us to realize that, like, look, we have a misunderstanding. I'm not like, I don't hate you. I love you, frustrated with you, but I also want to resolve this so we can get back to being happy-go-lucky, yada, yada, yada. And there's, ebbs and flows. There's been times where it's been like a month of constant bickering and yada, yada, yada. But the ultimate nugget of advice there is just to not yell. The third nugget of advice is going back to giving each other times. Another thing that couples end up doing is giving each other the silent treatment. Going back to the assumptions, because it's like, well, they should know why I'm mad. I'm not going to say anything till they say something. And, you know, if you have eyeballs on your head and can read a room somewhat, you can tell when someone's upset. And so when you, if they don't feel like they should need to, anyway, all we do is I'll go up to her, she'll come up to me, and we'll say, your turn. And the reason why is because when we do have those discussions, those arguments, one person will say what's on their mind, and then we'll say, your turn. And then the other person will give their point of it, and then kind of give the ball back by just saying your turn. So we kind of go back to that thing. If she's mad at me and I can tell, I'll just come up to her and tell her your turn, and she'll be like, it's nothing. And I'll be like, no, your turn, because I know that she needs to talk about it, or else she'll keep thinking and brewing and stewing about it. Because there's that line of giving yourself time to think, and then also stewing and brewing and getting into a negative spiral. So yeah, saying your turn. And the fourth thing is, I've noticed that as I've developed my communication skills with Elizabeth, my significant other, my communication skills with my siblings and my parents has increased as I put in that work in myself. Because inevitably, when you work on a relationship, you are part of that relationship, so you're also working on yourself. And so I've noticed that when my parents, get in arguments, I'll take one of them away at a time and just let them vent to me about what's so frustrating, and give, some, like, oh, well, maybe think about it this way, or maybe this, or whatever, or just not say anything and just let them vent. But in my own conversations, like my mother, love her to death. However, she's my mother, and that means that we're not going to always see eye to eye. And so I take these same things where I'll make her say, essentially the same, the your turn, like, what's bothering you, just air it out. And then she airs out what I'm doing that's bothering her. And then I give my point of view, and it's really helped. So I guess those four little pieces of advice on communication, at least my own personal growth in communication. And I'm not the most perfect person either, but you have to, as a human, learn how to communicate, or else you'll end up as a bitter old man. Well, not old lady, old man, whatever. You'll end up as a bitter old person, just living in your shack at 80 years old, because you can't seem to communicate well with anyone. And that's not something I desire for myself or anyone around me, really.
Absolutely. Thank you for the nuggets of wisdom.
I hope they're gold nuggets, not chicken nuggets.
I don't
Either
know.
way,
I like chicken nuggets as much as the next guy, maybe even more.
I think that it's interesting that you bring up giving each other time, or whatever person time. Doesn't have to be a one-on-one thing. And I find that interesting because it's the first thing that I haven't like disagreed with per se, but I've had a counterpoint to that. I think we've all kind of agreed on everything up to this point, and I agree that that is like a good strategy some of the time. But a rule that I've abided by in my personal relationship has been to never leave things on a bad note, to avoid that brewing and stewing and spirals and whatnot that you described. So quite often after an argument, like, I won't go to bed or do anything else until I've at least laughed with the other person, like until I've done something to break the tension, even if we're not in full agreement yet. And that has been really advantageous, at least to me. I think both strategies can be employed in different situations and between different types of people. But I think sometimes it's good to address things immediately and get the air cleared immediately. And sometimes it's good to wait and give it some time.
I agree with that 100%. Yeah, I agree with that. I there's been there's been a lot of times where somewhat begrudgingly, but also realizing that, like, okay, if I'm late for work, I'd rather be late for work and have the potential to get a write up than like ruin my relationship because I didn't take 3 or even 2 extra minutes to just somewhat, make amends, even if we still haven't had an agreement. If I have to go to somewhere or she has to leave, like, I'll just be like, look, whoever's waiting on you can wait 2 minutes. You can say it was traffic or something. Like, let's just, like you said, at least try and laugh or embrace or something. Um, uh, you know, uh, there's, I don't remember where, but it's, some story of you don't ever want your last, if someone was get in a car accident, if you're on a phone call, to be an argument. You always want those last words to be like an "I love you" or "take care" or something like that, and always positive. But yeah, I agree with that.
So I think I didn't quite understand something 100%. You told the story of how your coach always made you discuss what was upsetting you the day after.
Yeah.
And then I don't think there was a clarification. There could have been, and I could have just didn't hear it. But I don't know if there was a clarification on whether or not you and Elizabeth always wait the next day,
Oh
or how long you wait in general. I don't know.
no, no, sorry. The the example, the reason why I said, like, with my coach's example, is he always made us wait a day. Elizabeth and I, we don't wait a day till we talk about things. We usually try to air it out as quickly as we can so we can resolve it as quickly as we can. But I was kind of segueing it in that you want to give yourself some time to cool down, so that way you're not getting into it just out of emotion and the anger, because the anger doesn't help the argument, um, if that makes sense. And so, like,
Yeah.
yeah, and typically, Friday nights is high school football, and so you're out there on the field bashing heads with the other team, and your emotions are high, and if the stakes, if the game's on the line and stakes are high, and your coach pulls you out for some reason, like, you're gonna be frustrated, like, why? And so instead of spending that evening, because uh, you know, arguing with the coach, just go home, rest, talk about it the next day, and then have a civil conversation. And so, you know, again, give yourself time to cool off, but then resolve it as quickly as you can.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree that it's very situational.
Yes.
You you kind of just have to decide for yourself. For example, if you're just talking in circles and over again, just talking in circles, sometimes I think you probably do need to just take some time. And I probably need to talk to Haley about that and see if that's something we want to implement. But because I'm definitely more on F's side of things, where I tend to hash things out in right then. I can be upset, I can be angry, I can be sad. Um, I don't really get angry too often, besides at video games every once in a while, because I've that's just an emotion I've kind of tried to put in the dumpster. I don't like getting angry, but in the opposite sense, I get sad instead. So I don't know if that's exactly
Hmm.
better. But anyways, regardless of my emotion at the time, I will have Haley and I hash things out.
Hmm.
And I don't know if that's always the best thing to do. I think Haley might be better if she has time to think about something, because there are a lot of times where she does need a lot of time to think about things, and that's fine. If you need more time to articulate your words and to really truly understand what emotions you're feeling in that moment about the specific thing, then it could be so beneficial to take some time to think about it and then come back to the matter. And I personally need to be better at that, about giving that time. I am incredibly impatient when it comes to some things that I shouldn't be impatient about, especially when it comes to like communicating, 'cause communicating is incredibly important.
I'm the
And
same way. I like conflict resolution like right now, and I think that has pros and cons.
yeah, it's definitely a pros and cons list to that one.
Yeah, and I guess from my experience, I prefer it sooner than later. But for my relationship, like Elizabeth, she needs her time. Like if I try and push things, she puts up, or like magnets, I guess, like two north side magnets. She needs time to I don't know, to process things sometimes. And so that's, I guess, where, every relationship's different. There's not one all be all. Um, there's things you can learn and apply from other folks' experiences, right? But every relationship's unique in its own way. So,
I think the only time I really give time to someone whenever we have something to communicate between each other, whether it be a disagreement, whether it be a positive thing, I typically don't wait. If
mhm.
if I see something about someone that I like, for example, I'll just tell them. Even if they're a stranger walking, the opposite way of me on the street or in a mall, like, oh, I love your hair. I love your dress. I remember one time I I can't remember exactly what they called it, but I was like, "Oh, I love your outfit. Is it a?" Essentially, I think I asked if it was a dress, and they were like, "No, it's a romper." And then Haley was with me, and it like made our day. Just that little compliment, and the way that that lady responded to that compliment. And I love things like that. I love being able to communicate with people in a way that quickly gets my idea across. I'm
Mhm.
not saying that you shouldn't wait. I'm just saying that I don't wait and that I need to
Sure.
work on waiting. But I guess whenever it comes to like positive things, what is your guys' opinions on waiting or saying that just outright or saying it in general? Because I feel like
So
all the communication we've talked about how to do it well, but most of it has pertained to, whenever you're upset
Conflict
at each
resolution.
other or you're angry with each other. What about when
Yeah.
you're, really in love with them and you want to compliment them or you think they did a good job on something?
I think that I'm a shy person, but I also have that impulse to say things. So like depending on how insecure I'm feeling that day, I will be just like you, where I am handing out compliments to strangers. And I try to especially compliment guys because guys do not get enough compliments. But then it's a little bit weird and makes me a little bit afraid because some guys are weirdos and the slightest thing will set them off and they'll start following you or whatever. So that's a whole mess, but I try to follow that impulse when it comes up. But I think when you're in a relationship, like it's great to do that with strangers, and I think everyone should do that. But when you're in a relationship, I think it's also important to do that. And it can be, I think, even harder to compliment someone you like and know very well than a stranger sometimes, just because it takes a little more vulnerability. It takes a little bit of, like, sometimes, at least in my case, sometimes it's a little bit out of my pride to say, hey, I appreciate this about you, and I don't think that I personally have this quality. And I'm a little embarrassed almost to say I love you so freaking much, and I don't know what to do about it because I'm just have all this emotion. I think it ties back to that vulnerability and being able to show yourself to someone in an imperfect state, and say something that will hopefully make them feel nice, and do that tiny little sacrifice of like be feeling embarrassing or vulnerable, so that they feel nice and so that your relationship can grow stronger.
All right, guys. After this podcast, and to those listening, go tell your significant other. Go tell someone, one of your best friends. Go tell your mom. Go tell them you love them. um, no, I think it's amazing to be able to be vulnerable. Though I have noticed that most people are very uncomfortable with how vulnerable I am. I don't
Yeah,
know if
it
that's
could be pros and cons. I think one of the reasons we connected is we're both people who tell it like it is, and will immediately say if we're having a bad day or explain exactly how we're feeling, even if we don't know each other that well. So I think that does make some people uncomfortable, but if you find somebody that appreciates that, it can be an instant connection. And
yeah.
I think there's some people where they may seem uncomfortable, but they actually feel more comfortable because they might not have encountered that vulnerability before. They might not be used to it, but then it gives them the opportunity to be more vulnerable. I think some people appreciate it more than they let on.
I have seen so many opportunities to really connect with people and to listen to people and to hear people and to see what I can only describe as the beautiful canvas of humanity that is made up from every single one of its individuals because I was vulnerable first and because I posed to them, "Hey, I trust you. I might not even know you, but I trust you to be a good enough of a person to take what I'm saying and be vulnerable about and to treat me well after I'm vulnerable with you." And I I've kind of run into the saying where I have a lot of people who truly dearly love me because of how vulnerable I am. And I have had people hate me and despise me because of my vulnerability. And I still experience that today. It's still like an extremely prevalent thing where, for example, I'm visiting Oklahoma, where I'm from, and I'm gonna be visiting Mike. Actually, I'm gonna be staying with him and my sister and their son. Sorry, and I it's interesting because I'm going back and I have some friends to hang out with for sure, but I have not nearly the amount of friends that I once had because of a lot of stuff that happened, and part of that was because I was so vulnerable. In fact, all of it was because I was so vulnerable. Because I was so vulnerable to someone and they betrayed that trust that I put in them and they told everyone about the thing I was vulnerable about with them. And it was one of those things that was so hard to get over, and but I decided that even after that and even after some other things that I truly adore the person that I am becoming. I'm not quite at that point where I can, confidently be like, "Oh yeah, I love myself." And I'm definitely far from one of those people that be like, "Oh, I love myself way more than I love everyone else." And I don't want to get to that point. I want to be in the middle. But I love the person that I am becoming because I can see that the effort that I am putting into myself to communicate and to be vulnerable and to love people is paying off. And I think being vulnerable is one of those things that is just so fantastic and so unique because the way I'm vulnerable is so different from the way Haley is vulnerable. You know, I'm just an open book all the time. Haley is I'm an open book with all this information and knowledge. It's good, it's great. But Haley is like a clam, she's hard to get to open up. Whenever you open her up, there's that pearl there, that pearl of information and beauty that is my wonderful fiance's soul and heart and mind and everything. She's wonderful and I love seeing when she's vulnerable with me and I love being vulnerable with her because I know that she loves me and she'll treat me well no matter what. And she knows that I love her and I'll treat her well no matter what. And we've only come to that point because we've been vulnerable with each other and because we've communicated about things. And we're very open about how much we love each other to everyone. I tell everyone how much I love my fiance. Everyone knows. There's no hiding it. I won't hide it. I won't be ashamed of it. You can't make me.
I guess that's one of the things that can put people off about vulnerability is it can come off as self-obsession in the sense that you're constantly declaring things about yourself. So I can sort of sympathize with people who might be like, "Whoa, I didn't necessarily ask to hear this about you," but I think that it is a measure of courage to put yourself out there, and more people should, because most people nowadays are very reserved and keep things back and tell half truths and white lies and just whatever social nicety they think will get them through the situation with the surest outcome. I think we've been saying vulnerability a lot. If you guys don't mind, I pulled up Brene Brown's definition of vulnerability because I think it might be helpful to define it for people who are not sure what we're talking about,
Oh,
if
yeah.
that's all right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
The definition of vulnerability is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. But vulnerability is not weakness, it's our most accurate measure of courage. When the barrier to our belief about vulnerability the barrier is our belief about vulnerability, the question becomes, are we willing to show up and be seen when we can't control the outcome? When the barrier to vulnerability is about safety, the question becomes, are we willing to create courageous spaces so we can be fully seen? So I think that distinction is the part I was missing when I was trying to explain vulnerability earlier. To like put yourself out there when you don't know what's going to happen, when you don't know how someone will react. And I agree that it's very, very brave. So I think you're a very brave person for that, David.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Mhm.
I don't feel brave. But if we're gonna communicate and be vulnerable with each other and be honest, I don't feel brave. I personally I don't really see myself as a incredibly great person, but I see myself as someone who is trying to be an incredibly great person. And I think for now that's enough for me in terms of self-love. It's come a long way for sure. So that's good. But I think I think that communication is really interesting right now too because I'm trying to make a lot of friends. So I'm talking just about my own personal experience with a lot of the communication I'm doing right now. I started using Bumble BFF a while back, a few months ago, to try to make friends. I met F's partner who was on there, and we actually got together and we ended up playing D&D with F and her partner and some other people, and then it didn't work out, but that's all fine and everything. And uh, on the topic of, you know, conversating to make friends is very interesting because I I I suppose it could be because I moved or and I'm in a different location, but I really don't think that that's the reason that the communication that I had in Oklahoma with the people that aren't my friends anymore versus the communication with the people that are here where I live now and with these new friends that I'm making is so different isn't because of the location. The very variable there that changed was me and how I communicated and how vulnerable I was and am now versus how I communicated 2 years ago and how vulnerable I was 2 years ago. And I attribute so much of my growth to Haley, my fiance, and so much of my growth to myself because I have put a lot of work and effort into that. But for example, whenever I was uncomfortable with a situation or something that someone said, whenever it came to the people that I was with in Oklahoma, I would just not say anything. I would just let it slide or go. It ended up just being this thing where consistently I got into these awkward situations because I didn't know how to communicate properly. I have always been charismatic. I've always been able to speak well, but to communicate well, everything that we've been talking about with the ways that you guys communicate and the ways you've learned how to communicate are all things that I'm just recently learning. I'm incredibly new to this. And I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about it, is because it's something I think a lot about now. I think a lot about how I'm communicating to people, what I'm saying, and how I want what I'm saying to come off, where it's communicating the message, hey, David loves you. He might be mad, he might be upset, he might be sad, but he loves you. And he cares about you. To everyone, despite our differences, despite our disagreements, despite anything, I want to communicate that to the world. So I guess I have two things I could ask you guys. And you could answer either of these. What is it you try to communicate to the world in general? Who is it that you're trying to show and communicate with everyone? Not maybe not even equally, but what are you trying to show to everyone and communicate with them that you're giving to the world? I know that's not exactly the topic of communication, but I almost feel like it's very close to what it is, because whenever I'm talking to my fiance, Haley, I want to communicate a lot of things to her. And there's a lot of ways I can communicate with her differently than everyone else. But in the end, I'm still giving her that communication. Hey, I love you. Hey, it's going to be okay. No matter what, I'm going to love you. So I pose that first question to you guys. Secondly, whenever it comes to being in that heat of the moment, what do you say to yourself? How do you communicate to yourself in different ways in order to stay on top of your emotions or on top of a heated moment? Because it's really easy to say all these things, to say that you should take a moment to cool off and to process things, or to hash things out in the moment and to not leave a situation upset. But I know a lot of people, myself included, who have struggled with or still do struggle with. I'm fortunate enough not to struggle with it as much as I used to, or really at all. But I used to struggle with anger incredibly badly, and it had a lot to do with my health. I was in pain all the time, and I still am. But it was new to me, and I was just so angry at the world for being in so much pain that people would talk to me and it would set me off instantly, and I would just yell at them, and I would insult them, and I would call them names, and I would say, "Why are you so dumb? Why are you saying these things to me? Stop talking to me." Obviously, that's terrible communication. And I first had to learn how to control my emotions. So, I mean, you could just say maybe you have to learn to control your emotions before you can even learn how to communicate. But how do you two, when you're sad or angry or having a negative emotion, how do you communicate with yourself? What do you say to yourself? Do you say like, "We're better than this," or "This person deserves better than this"? I don't know. Like, what is it that you two do?
I find your first question interesting because um, to rehash what I think you were asking, which was what type of communication do you try and put out to absolutely everyone, to the world?
Yes.
And I find that interesting because I don't necessarily try to communicate with the world. I'm a very individual, one on one or small groups type of person. I will say that whenever I am in a conversation with someone, especially strangers, I try and put them at ease and make them comfortable because I'm a very anxious person and I am uncomfortable the vast majority of the time. So I essentially try and make up for the things that make me uncomfortable with other people and make them feel at ease. Or at least I try to. I don't know how effective that actually is. But I don't think I'm necessarily trying to put anything, even good vibes, out into the world in general, because I'm still working on my self-esteem enough to do that. I'm kind of on the defensive against the world because I see the world at large as something that will judge me. So that's something that I need to work on, I guess. But I found the question interesting because the very fact that you were asking that says so much about your personality and how you view things, if that makes sense.
What do you mean?
As in, like, you see yourself as interfacing with the entire world. You see yourself as communicating with the world. You see yourself as someone who is trying to push love out into the world. Whereas that's a difference in our personalities, in that I don't see myself as interfacing or trying to put something out into the entire world. I see myself very much working with individuals.
I that's interesting because whenever I see a stranger on the street, almost until I say something to them, they don't really exist in my mind.
Hmm.
Like if I saw them fall and get hurt, I'm gonna rush over. I'm gonna help them. If I have to take them to the emergency room and keep them company until their family gets there, sure, I'll do that. But like, I wouldn't even say that. Like, I look through a crowd of people and see individuals. I just see a crowd of people, and I don't know if that makes me like a bad person because like as soon as I'm talking to them, oh, I'm there. I am present. They mean everything to me in that moment. I'm gonna give them all of my attention, all of my love, everything that I can give to make them feel comfortable as well, like you do. I really resonated with that, because that's something I try to do is make people feel at ease and comfortable. Because I know what it's like to not be comfortable, and I know what it's like to make people feel uncomfortable, and both suck. So I don't want either of them to happen. But I don't know. I've never really thought about how I view people. And obviously, this is something that can be talked about at a later time because it really doesn't have a lot to do. I mean, it could have a lot to do with communication, how you view people as like individuals or as, your waiter or waitress or the person, selling you a movie ticket. I'm trying to be nice and I'm trying to communicate love to them still because that's my goal is to communicate that to everyone, the whole world. But yeah, it's not because they're an individual who I love individually because I don't know them. So I don't know if you're saying that like you view everyone as an individual.
Well, I want to clarify that I'm not accusing you of being a bad person
No,
or
no, 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 no.
dehumanizing
That was
people.
me like internalizing. I shouldn't have said that. I'm trying to be nicer to myself. But no, I don't typically assume. I try not to assume at all, but even if I am assuming something, I typically try to assume that someone has my best intentions in mind, and their own best intentions in mind. So I did not take it personally. You're okay there.
Okay. But yeah, I think I do more than the average person, and this is where I start to feel a little bit self-conscious because I don't like I have struggled to talk positively about myself. But I think that more than the average person, I do see even strangers as, or even people I can't see as individuals with lives just as complicated as my own. I don't need to talk to them necessarily. Me and my partner have a running joke where he will pick something up from one part of the store and we'll decide we're not going to buy it, and he will leave it just wherever we are, and I will run across the store and bring it back to where it's supposed to be because I don't want some poor Walmart worker to have to run it back when we, the customer, made the problem. So I think that is a possible strength of mine. Well, strength and weakness, because it means that I put too much weight into strangers' theoretical opinions that don't have any weight on my actual life. But it is a strength in the sense that I think I'm more than considerate. I'm genuinely thoughtful and kind about you, no matter how little I know you. Or at least I try to be, if that makes sense. So I guess but that's an aside. What I meant when I tried to clarify the difference between the way we see things is I just thought it was really a fascinating question to say, what do you try and communicate to the world? Because I don't try to communicate to the world, but you see yourself as putting love out into the world. So that's just an interesting like shift of perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I uh I really respect you for the way you act and view things. It's a
Well,
very
thank you.
respectful way to look at the world.
I appreciate that.
Mike, have ye anything that ye wish to answer about the questions or anything that we talked about not entirely regarding the questions?
Nope. When the world turns its back on you, turn your backside on the world. Just kidding. It's a good Pumbaa quote. No, I had to agree with what F said about you, David, as far as that question. And I think, like you said, David, you don't, and most people don't. We see people. I mean, we've all played video games. Everyone else is just an NPC to us until you actually interact with them. Um, but depending on how deep that interaction goes, whether they're just a worker at a fast food restaurant or at a Walmart or something like that, yeah, I try to be considerate the same way and making their life just a little bit easier and if I can and whatnot. But David, I mean, the way that I know that you've always been and that you've had your ebbs and flows as I've known you these past 6 years. I definitely think that when we first met, you were, I was going to say high and mighty, but well, yeah, you're high and you're mighty in your efforts to make everyone feel, and everyone meaning the world, your world, meaning the people that you came in contact with, right? Once you came in contact with them, then you gave him your all. And I've also seen you where you were not doing that. But and it's not like any judgment against you, but it's your growth, and I see that you've not just returned to where you were before, but you've far exceeded that. And even despite the challenges that you have physically and whatever not with pain, um, the world doesn't know these things. The world doesn't know. The random stranger on the street doesn't know these things. And going back to your vulnerability, your willingness to share that with them is never so much of a, oh, look at me, poor me, poor me, please pity me, please, yada. It's never been that. The way you've always described your hardships and your pain, you've always tried to put it on your own shoulders. And that the braveness of that, alongside the vulnerability of sharing that, has always been to help the people that you find and talk, as an opening for them to share their own thing. And then you always give great suggestions on how they can improve or find comfort and solace. Anyway, where I'm getting at here is, I think, David, it's an interesting question that you posted that, because I feel like, at least again, to the people that you meet, your world, you're always trying to do that. So I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Maybe if you haven't already, start I know you're writing for a little bit, but maybe go public. Write a blog. Write something. I mean, you're doing it with this podcast now, so keep on that same track. That's my suggestion. Your second question, though. Repeat that second question.
Sorry. I just want to say thank you to both of you for the words that you gave to me or towards me. I do appreciate it and is needed. Um, the second question I asked was, whenever you're feeling a negative emotion, like I gave the example of me being angry,
Mm.
how do you get through those emotions? How do you manage those emotions well enough to communicate? How do you communicate when you're so angry at the other person that you just want to scream or run away or give them the silent treatment or whatever it may be?
Even if that person's yourself, yeah, I've gone through a lot of growth, but also the way that I look at it is I felt like I've plateaued a lot in my own life goals and progression and things like that. And it's like, yeah, there's milestones I'm still hitting and goals I'm still achieving, but like deep down, I just feel like I'm not getting there. And I guess it's just because I'm stuck in the slog of the grind and the progress until I can finally come out on the other side, be like, oh yeah, okay, finally, good, finish that. And so because of that, I think one step is to take a step back and just realize where you're at, and realize that the journey isn't over. um, I'm trying to remember. There's a silly phrase about the journey's not over till you're dead yet, until you're dead. And are you dead yet? It's like, no. Okay, well, the journey's still going. Something like that. And so, life's a journey. Life's difficult for everybody. And no matter what background or way that you grew up or are currently living in. And yeah, you get down on yourself, you get frustrated with yourself, you get angry with yourself, you get sad with yourself, and it sucks. But one of the things that always helps me is to just have an understanding of where I want to go, where I want to be. I used to be really good about writing down my goals, 10-year goal, 5-year goal, 3-year goal, 1-year goal, month goals. And even though I have gotten out of those habits, I still have my 10-year goal and my 5-year goal somewhere where I can see them. And I work toward those things. And I just chunk things out. And I realized that, okay, today sucked. There's still tomorrow. Like today at work just was absolutely boring. I feel like I did nothing and I wasted company time, and I felt like I just was like, what am I even doing here? Why are they paying me? And so tomorrow's a new day though, and I have another opportunity to feel productive and feel like, I'm making my labor's worth it, and to have that feel good. So yeah, communicating those negative emotions to yourself is important. You got to be honest with yourself. Take a mental check, or a personal internal check of where you're at, where you want to go. And I guess for me, just taking time to think through things, it helps. Busying your hands, doing something with your hands, being productive, whether whether it's playing an old video game that you've played a bajillion times. For me, that'd be like Skyrim or Halo 2. Neither of those games are breakthrough games nowadays, but they're things that I've done hundreds of times. But while I'm doing them, I'm able to just think. Or if it's working, on a project with my hands or whatever it might be, mowing the lawn or doing whatever it needs to do, just having that time where I can work but also think and talk myself through things. And I might start that process and that project in a negative mood, and by the time I'm done, I feel motivated. Not every time, but a good portion of the times, motivated to do better and to do out to improve and to keep going, and pushing through life. And but yeah, I guess long story short, just communicating with yourself it's important, as well as with others. And how do you do that? Just being honest, and again going back to being vulnerable, and taking that humility pill or cookie or muffin, just taking that humility and being humble and putting yourself out there, for others to help you. Anyway, I'm done.
I think it's also important not to assume things about yourself.
Yeah, true.
We all surely have some kind of trauma, everyone. Uh, it might not be enough to give us PTSD or be this thing that wakes us up in nightmares, but maybe even if it's not called trauma, but I think a lot of people like to talk about childhood trauma or different types of trauma. Um, but sometimes I assume things about myself that aren't correct. that aren't fair to me because of the trauma I've gone through. I think sometimes I get on the defense and Haley is confused and she's like, I wasn't trying to be mean. I wasn't trying to say that in a malicious way. And I just have to, I have to, like you said, be honest with myself and not assume that I got defensive and upset because I'm a bad person or because I wasn't understanding her well enough or listening well enough. Because sometimes it's not always that simple. Sometimes we just react. And it's of course important to act and not react, to think about what you're going to say before you say it, and to control your emotions. But sometimes that just doesn't happen. And that's understandable, and that is something you can work through. That is something that you can improve on, and that is something that you and that whoever it is that you're talking to can work out together. I truly, truly believe that you can communicate through pretty much most disagreements and most differences in beliefs. I like, unless someone's like crazy and they think that like murdering is okay or something that's just like fundamentally wrong to you, I feel like you should be able to communicate with them and to talk to them and to love them and be their friend, or however far you want to take it. But at the base level, you should be able to communicate with everyone. And personally, I mean, obviously if someone's toxic to you, that's kind of going against your fundamental beliefs of, or I don't know, for me, my fundamental beliefs are to treat people with love and respect. And if someone's not ever showing anyone, myself included, love or respect, that person should not be in my life. Um, Especially if I've tried to talk to them about it and they refuse to change. I remember there's been several times I've said this on Bumble BFF where people said, "Oh, I'm this and that. Oh, I'm this and that. Are you sure you want to be my friend?" Or, "Thank you for being my friend. Most people aren't my friend because of this and that." And I just always tell them, I always ask, "Hey, are you trying to be a better person? Are you trying, maybe not every day, but maybe every other day or every week, to improve yourself?" And every single time they've been like, "Yeah, I I am." And I say, "Oh, great, we can be friends then. We can make this thing work. We can get through disagreements. We can get through differences. We can be friends and talk about how we believe in different things." I have this friend, Gigi Sui, and a lot of people um are not like him because he loves to talk and discuss things and debate things. And we have very different beliefs in a lot of things. He is pretty anti-religion in like a sense that he really just, from what I've gathered from his descriptions and everything about it, is that, I mean, he just, yeah, I don't even need to get into that. But I, for one, have a faith in a religion and in a belief system. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, same as Mike, and proud to be one. And I love talking to Michael about what we don't agree with. And I love talking to him and about the things that he believes in and stands for, even though they are different from what I believe in and stand for. Because I think fundamentally, we agree on the same things. We agree on being nice to people and trying to be better people. And I truly believe that most people deep down have that fundamental belief. I have been meeting people for quite a while now on Mobile BFF, and I can only, like, on one hand list the amount of people that have giving me bad energy or bad vibes or been mean or done something that I fundamentally didn't agree with. But everyone else, the majority of the people that I interact with and show love to, like that moment I throw the ball in their court, they people latch onto that. People want to be talked to. People want to be loved and communicated with, and people want to be heard and understood. And people want to be better, is what I have seen. I have seen a desire for growth in humanity that is unlike anything else I've ever seen. Humanity amazes me day in and day out with how kind and generous people are. When I posed that first question, I at all did not expect you to both essentially compliment me and say nice things about me because of it. I personally I didn't think it was that interesting of a question because like you said, like just my view is so much that I am giving an energy to the world and I am giving a message to the world at all times. I just didn't expect your guys' reactions. Yet it was given to me. Yet once again, I was reminded of how kind people can be. It's not saying that it's been a long time. I mean, Haley and I were talking earlier and she was reminding me how nice people can be. And it's just, it's not an infrequent thing where I am impressed by what some people call the humanity of humanity, if that makes sense.
Yes, very much.
I just, yeah, I think I put a lot of faith into other people. And there's that funny saying where it's like, I'm ready to get hurt again when people were talking about like wanting to date again. And essentially, I had the same emotion where, because I lost like 99% of my friends, or, 90 something percent of my friends from Oklahoma. And that was like all of my friends. I lost all of them. And I lost all of my self respect. And I lost all of my like credit in that area. Even people that weren't my friends wouldn't be my friends or unfollowed me in different ways or said things to me because of what my old friends had said to them or about me. Yet I, like you said, I am at that point again where I want friends and I want to give myself out to the world and to be seen and to be heard and to be loved and be understood. I am ready to be heard again. And I'm excited for it because I'm better than I was then. I'm better than I was 2 years ago when all of that crazy stuff happened. So to think about, it's weird to think about that I think that the next trial that I interact with, that I that is like at that level, where another person hurts me. I want to see how I'll react this time because last time I reacted out in sadness and I tried to take my own life and it was horrible. It was a horrible reaction. Um and I never want to do that again. I never want to react that way again. I want to have something like that happen to me and be like, okay, they hurt me. That person hurt me. And it's okay. I'm okay. I'll be okay. It'll all be okay. And I feel like that's so important to communicate to yourself and to everyone that things can be better tomorrow than they were today. that I can be better tomorrow than I was today. And I think that it's just important to love yourself and to communicate that love to yourself. And that's something I am working on and will continue to work on hopefully for the rest of my life. So, I think this is a good point to end the podcast. Thank you so much to both of you for coming on. Any last remarks, Mike?
Nope, I don't really have anything to say. How ironic in a communicating podcast. Thanks for having me on. It was a joy. And I think we had a good discussion.
I do too. Any last remarks, F?
I guess just I am trying to. I'm working in therapy and in my life and stuff to silence my inner critic, because I have an inner critic that critiques myself mostly, but also everyone else all the time. It's just part of my perfectionism is I'm always running a dialogue of what could have been done better and everything. So I just wanted to be a little vulnerable and express that I feel very heavily that the podcast was imperfect and I'm judging myself for it, but I'm trying not to. And if I really think about it and I'm not just going with my instincts, if I actually think about it, I think, like, just like painting is a valid form of self expression, even if you're not perfect at it. And just as a regular person's painting has a lot of value, even if they aren't a professional at it, I think that exercises like this have a lot of value, whether people listen or not. So I thank you for this opportunity, David, and I think it's really cool that you are engaging in methods of self-expression like this.
I'm sorry if it came off almost like I just wanted to vent.
I mean, even if you did, that's a good way of doing it.
It truly wasn't the intent. And I hope it didn't come off like I was just talking about myself way too much.
Oh, no, definitely not. I just mean that it is a piece of self-expression. Just like when you paint, you're not necessarily painting yourself all the time.
Okay.
You are expressing pieces of yourself through it. So I didn't mean to say uh, that you were talking too much or talking too much about yourself or anything.
Okay. I see. There's that defense mechanism coming out again. I just, it's just gotta be like, I don't know. But thank you so much for everything, both of you, and thank you so much to everyone who listens to this. Mom, looking out to you. I hope you listen to this. I love you, Mom. All right. And thank you so much. Goodbye.